People are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing. Nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it.
This is one of the most brilliant arguments you will ever hear promoting God in the Bible. If you don't believe he's right, listen up and tell me how you think he's off down in the comments. If you feel this content is good and helpful, give us a like. That helps tremendously. Alrighty, let's get into it.
I believe in God. I believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence. I believe that on the basis of rational evidence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian.
Okay, I love how he comes out swinging right at the bell. So he's a scientist and he's a Christian. And he is so because of rational thinking, not in spite of it like most atheists would like to believe. And his main argument here is that nothing in science points away from a creator God. In fact, everything points to there being a creator God.
What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science.
I agree with him. How can you choose between God and science? Science doesn't create anything. It discovers things. I think a lot of people have that twisted up in their mind.
Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question. But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing, which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron. Nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it.
Again, science doesn't create, it discovers. The atheistic position leaves you with, like he said, an oxymoron, that everything came from nothing. The more you say that, the more ridiculous it sounds.
It reminds me a little bit of G.K. Chesterton, who said, "It is absurd to complain that it is unthinkable for an unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then to pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything."
Basically, it's unthinkable to give any credit to God, but it's okay to pretend that everything coming from nothing makes any sense whatsoever. Okay.
The heavens declare the glory of God, says the ancient psalm. And we've unraveled a bit of that, seeing the fine-tuning of the fundamental forces of nature. It's something that's so striking to scientists that it demands explanation.
Very simply put, the wonders of this universe are so complex and so finely tuned that the reason for their fine-tuning demands an answer.
And it seems to me that Arno Penzias hit it right. He is the Nobel Prize winner who discovered the microwave background on which a lot of the evidence for the Big Bang is based. He said astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan.
So even this guy, Arno Penzias, who won a Nobel Prize for his Big Bang model, says the only thing that makes sense for this delicate balance is some sort of supernatural design. So that was his argument for why God should not be removed from science. I thought it was a good one. And now he's going to get into the reason for why God should be the answer for everything. And this is even better. Watch this.
But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here. And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation. Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And Wigner talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here can come up with equations that seem to fit the universe out there? Well, how is it indeed?
And all he's saying here is that the ability to reason can't just come from nowhere either. Biological life has absolutely nothing we can observe that tells us why human beings have the ability to reason.
Because the irony of the atheist position here is evident. My atheist friends, and I have many of them, tell me that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know, ladies and gentlemen, what has often happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival.
You see, evolution doesn't have an answer for why we prioritize truth or prioritize reason. Evolution only cares about survival. Truth and reason do not help in survival at all. In fact, they hinder it. That's what he's saying.
A leading philosopher, Alvin Plantinga of Notre Dame, says if atheists are right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then they have given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including their atheism.
You see, if survival was the mechanism for evolution, that means nothing is true. Nothing is rational. That means you can't trust anything, including the atheistic narrative. You gotta love it. That logic literally leads to a complete dead end. Yet, that's the narrative. Let's go on.
Yet my atheist friends still insist that it is rational for them to believe that the evolution of human reason was not directed for the purpose of discovering truth. And yet, it is irrational for me to believe that human reason was designed and created by God to enable us to understand and believe the truth. Curious logic. By contrast with that, biblical theism asserts that ultimate reality is personal and intelligent, and the reason science works, and this was the motivating force that drove the great pioneers of science, is that the universe out there and the human mind in here that does the science are ultimately the product of the same intelligent divine mind.
See, the biblical answer is that we do seek truth and we do seek reason. And we seek those because we were made by someone truthful and made by someone who reasons, which to him seems the more likely answer. That's all he's saying there.
Human beings are made, we are told, in God's image. And that means that science can be done. That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than atheism does.
And it's all because we're made in God's image.
Now let me come briefly to ethics. Ethical behavior, like rational behavior, of course, does not itself require religious belief. This is consistent with the fact that humans are created in God's image as rational moral persons. But just as I suggest that rationality cannot be explained without the existence of God, so I dare to suggest that the existence of morality cannot be explained either.
That's pretty simple. If rational reasoning can't be explained by naturalistic evolution, which means no creator, no designer, then certainly morality, the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, can't be explained either. Morality has no place in a world of naturalistic evolution. It's survival of the fittest. In that world, there can't be no right or wrong. It's only survival.
As modern science sprang from Judeo-Christian sources, so did the concept of human equality. Listen to atheist Jürgen Habermas, arguably one of Germany's leading intellectuals. He said that universalistic egalitarianism, from which sprang the ideals of freedom and a collective life and solidarity, the individual morality of conscience, human rights and democracy, is the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. This legacy, substantially unchanged, has been the object of continual critical appropriation and reinterpretation. To this day, there's no alternative to it. Everything else is just idle, postmodern talk.
So even atheists say that what we have as a functional society comes from Judeo-Christian values. Now, watch what he does here. He's going to pivot from why atheistic evolution has no answer, but the Bible does have the answer. And it's powerful. People aren't valued based on what they can do. They're valued based on whose image they were created in. And that is so crucial.
And it seems to me he's hitting the core of something important. Because the value of a human being on which sits egalitarianism rests is based not on what the human being can do, but what she's made of, or how she's made in God's image. I never forget speaking on one of my many visits to Russia to a colleague in the Academy of Sciences. And he said, "You know, John, we thought we could abolish God and retain a value for human beings. We found we couldn't. And we murdered millions of them." And Alexander Solzhenitsyn has said, if I'm asked, why is it that 60 million of my fellow countrymen were sacrificed? He said, the answer is, we have forgotten God.
People die by the millions when you remove God from the equation. What's the point?
Science, of course, marvelous as it is limited. Even a Nobel Prize winner, by analyzing a cake, cannot tell why it was made. But Aunt Matilda, who made it, can tell you. She can reveal it to you. But if she doesn't reveal it to you, you'll never know. And that brings me to my next evidence. It's the same with the universe. We can analyze it magnificently. But ultimately, if it has a maker, and I believe it has, only he can tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, a Nobel Prize scientist can tell you everything about a cake, but he can't tell you why it was made. Same with science and God. It can tell you everything that makes up the universe, but it can't explain why it was made. The Bible reveals the truth.
And he's done so in the powerful narrative of the Bible, in particular in its analysis of the problem with humanity, not simply in terms of behavioral breakdown between people, but a vertical breakdown of trust between us and the Creator.
Isn't that the message of the Bible? We're messed up with each other, just like he said, but the reason for that is that we're actually severed vertically. There's a break, a disconnect between God and man.
The unique solution to that problem is not simply in terms of human ethical development, although that's very important, but in terms of something far deeper altogether. The restoration of the fractured relationship with God through the salvation he has brought through Jesus Christ. A radical relationship that empowers us to live ethically from God.
And that's the message of the gospel, that relationship can be repaired with God through the provision he has made in Jesus Christ. And when that happens, it's life-changing.
And here we reach what for me is the chief evidence, not only for the existence but the nature of God. It is Jesus Christ. He it was who not only taught the golden rule but embodied it, fed the hungry, healed the sick and suffering, and welcomed society's outcasts, brought honor and respect to the marginalized and ashamed. And he's brought forgiveness and peace to multi-millions around the world. He's able to do this, of course, because though he was a man, he uniquely never was only a man, but God become human.
Jesus embodied everything that truth and reason and morality and goodness represent. Only Jesus.
The central evidence for this startling claim is, of course, his historical resurrection from the dead that launched Christianity in the world. This is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a crunch issue. If Jesus rose from the dead, death is not the end and atheism is false. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, Christianity is false.
Everything hinges on the resurrection. If there is no resurrection, atheism is right and there is no hope for anything. But if Jesus did resurrect, which we believe he did, then that changes everything. And it means atheism is false, and it means that there is an ultimate hope.
And I remember at Cambridge as a student listening to the brilliant Sir Norman Anderson, a legal expert, going through forensically the evidence from his legal perspective as a brilliant lawyer. And he said at the end of it, The empty tomb, then, of Jesus forms a veritable rock on which all rationalistic theories of the resurrection dash themselves in vain.
So this Sir Norman Anderson, who was a professor of his, was a legal expert, and he basically said when you examine the forensic evidence, you're forced to one conclusion, and that is for the resurrection. And he's not the first either. He comes from a long list of people. There's a guy by the name of Lee Strobel who wrote a book called The Case for Christ. He was an atheist. He was the legal editor for the Chicago Tribune, whose wife became a Christian, and he tried to dissuade her by proving Christianity to be false, to get her out of it. And he went right to the resurrection to try to disprove that. He ends up becoming a Christian and spends the rest of his life trying to prove to others what he found to be true about the resurrection. J. Warner Wallace is another one. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. He's literally one of the world's most foremost and renowned experts in cold case file solving. He researched the resurrection and went from atheist to believer. And I'll toss you one more. The founder of Harvard Law School, Simon Greenleaf, he did the exact same thing. Tried to disprove the resurrection, ends up becoming a Christian. All three of those guys were considered to be the best in the world when it came to winning cases based on legal evidence. And they all came to the same conclusion when they examined the evidence as if it was a case in court. I'll link you below to some of their stuff. You can check it out. It is powerful.
Just finally now, as I read the Bible, I do not only find intellectual satisfaction, but I find a great deal of that. I sense the voice of God speaking to me. You say that's intensely personal. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked tonight about belief in God. And I want to strongly emphasize that God is not a theory, he's a person. And if the origination of me qua person is a personal God, then the most exciting thing really is there a possibility of getting to know God? And so I don't simply believe there is a God. I've come to know him and trust him. And I have strong reasons for doing so, because of Christ dying and rising again for me. And that has generated in me a sense of utterly unmerited forgiveness, acceptance, and peace.
Okay, so now he's shifted here. He's already presented all the rational reasonings for why God must exist, and now he's giving us the good news, and that is that God is actually knowable. He wants us to know him and have a personal, intimate relationship with him.
That has enabled me to face the ugly side of my own nature, and with God's help to do something about it. But it's enabled me to face something else. The hardest problem I face as a Christian is the problem of evil and pain.
Right? If all this is true, then what? If God exists and he created the world, then why is there so much suffering? Why does God allow it? Why is there so much evil in this world? Watch his answer here.
My niece getting a tumor at 22 that kills her. What do I say to my sister? And this is the hardest problem we face. But it seems to me that atheism here has no answer, because by definition, atheism believes that human death is the end, so there is no ultimate hope. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay here till midnight and beyond arguing, as has been done in this university for centuries, what a good God should, might, would, could, if not, possibly might, just could he not have done, and we'll get nowhere.
With God, there is hope. With atheism, there is no hope. And we can go back and forth and argue about what God should have done, what he could have done, what we would have done differently. Why did he do it this way? Why didn't he do it that way? And you'd get absolutely nowhere. But watch this.
So it seems to me there's another question we can ask, and it's this. Granted that life presents us with a double picture. We see some beautiful things. We see some ragged edges. We see hurt and pain, and we see joy. How can we come to terms with that? And it seems to me here is no simplistic answer, but a window into an answer, and it's this. If it is actually true that Jesus is, as I believe him to be, the Son of God, then we can ask the question, what is God doing on a cross? And the answer comes back at the very least. God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it.
What is God doing up on a cross? It's because he doesn't minimize our sufferings. He understands them. And he understands them intimately as he hangs there on that cross, dying for you and me.
And the other side of that is this: because Jesus rose from the dead, he is going to be the ultimate judge. Now here's an irony, because atheism has no ultimate hope of justice by definition. The vast majority of people in the history of the world have died without justice and will die without justice. And if death is the end, then of course they have no hope of ultimate justice. But the promise in the New Testament, guaranteed by the resurrection of Jesus, is that he is to be the judge in the coming day.
And if there's anybody that should ever preside as judge over justice, then it's got to be the one who suffered the most injustice. And please, I beg you, pay attention to his heart in his moment of suffering. In the greatest moment of injustice that this world has ever seen, as he's being put up on that cross, his prayer was to forgive those who were doing it to him because they didn't even know what they were doing. You might be the person that doesn't know what you're doing. You might be the person that's chanted, "Crucify Jesus," your whole life. But you know what? God wants you to be forgiven because you don't know what you're doing. You can come to him. He loves you. He died for you. He showed you he knows what suffering is like by suffering with you and for you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the reasons why I believe that God is real and worthy to be trusted. Thank you.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. He is real. He is worthy to be trusted. Why don't you just take a chance? You have nothing to lose by saying, "God, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what I believe, but I'm going to trust you. Will you meet me where I'm at, God?" And watch what happens. That's it for now. I'll do more of these. Please like and subscribe and share and all that stuff. It helps the channel immensely. And I pray you're blessed in Jesus' name.